April 30, 1945. The Fuhrerbunker, Berlin. In a small, windowless room beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, a woman swallows a cyanide capsule and dies within seconds. Her name is Eva Braun. She's been married for less than 40 hours. Her husband, Adolf Hitler, dies moments later. For 17 years, Eva lived as Hitler's secret mistress, a relationship so carefully hidden that most Germans only learned of her existence after both their deaths. She held no political office. She gave no speeches. She wasn't a Nazi ideologue or a war criminal in any legal sense. Yet she chose to die beside history's greatest mass murderer. The question that haunts historians is simple. Who was Eva Braun? And what does her story teach us about complicity, privilege, and the human capacity for willful blindness? This isn't a story of redemption. It's a story about how ordinary people become entangled with extraordinary evil. And it's more disturbing than you might think. The Golden Cage. Eva Braun met Adolf Hitler in 1929 when she was 17 years old, working as an assistant in the photography studio of Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer. Hitler was 40, already a rising political figure in Germany. The relationship began quietly and remained secret for years. By 1936, Eva had become Hitler's unofficial companion, though the German public knew nothing about her. She lived in what some have called a golden cage, granted privileges, given an apartment in Munich, eventually brought into Hitler's inner circle at the Berghof, his mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps. But she could never stand beside him publicly as his wife, never attend state functions on his arm, never have her photograph appear in newspapers as Germany's First Lady. The Berghof became her world. High in the mountains, far from the cities Hitler was destroying, Eva carved out a strange existence. She played hostess to generals planning invasions. She filmed Christmas celebrations while deportation trains rolled to death camps. She sunbathed on terraces while millions died on battlefields her companions had ordered them to. And she seems to have convinced herself this was normal. The illusion. The Berghof sat like a fortress against reality. Within its walls, a peculiar world continued, as if the war raging across Europe was happening on some distant planet. Hitler's Alpine retreat served as an informal headquarters where the dictator could surround himself with domestic normalcy while directing operations that would kill millions. Eva organized the illusion. She arranged guest lists, chose which films would be shown in the evenings, decided who would be invited up the mountain. She loved cinema and fashion, watched American films when they could be obtained, changed outfits several times a day. Staff called her the boss. She directed servants, organized Christmas celebrations, fussed over details to make everything perfect. And she filmed everything. Using expensive 16mm color film, Eva created one of the strangest visual records of the Third Reich. Her footage shows Hitler playing with his dog, having coffee with children, celebrating birthdays, lighting Christmas candles. Warm colors, sunshine, smiles. While somewhere beyond the mountains, cities burned and people were deported to their deaths. Years later, one of Hitler's secretaries would ask in disbelief, "How was that possible? A ruthless warmonger and fanatical mass murderer enjoyed lighting Christmas tree candles and had a distinct need for the joys of family life?" The contradiction is almost unbearable to contemplate, because it reveals something we'd rather not see. Monsters don't always look like monsters. At the Berghof, Hitler didn't look like a dictator directing genocide. He looked like a man hosting friends. He sat in an armchair, talked for hours, worried about his dogs, celebrated holidays, and Eva sat beside him, laughing at the right moments, teasing him gently, understanding the unwritten rules of when to speak and when to stay silent. She lived in privilege while ordinary Germans starved. She traveled to Italy on Hitler's personal aircraft, while soldiers died by the thousands on the Eastern Front. In summer 1942, while German troops fought brutal battles in the Soviet Union, Eva and her sister spent 4 weeks on the Italian coast, drinking wine, sunbathing on beaches, laughing together. Her mother knitted beside the Mediterranean while tens of thousands died at Stalingrad. What did she know? The question historians struggle with. How much did Eva Braun know about the Holocaust? The honest answer: we can't be certain about specific details. What we can say with certainty: she lived at the very center of the Nazi regime. She heard conversations, she saw newspapers, she witnessed the systematic exclusion of Jews from German society, the confiscation of their property, their disappearance from public life. She couldn't have been completely ignorant, but Eva appears to have made a choice: not to look too closely. At the Berghof, she could focus on fragments of life she enjoyed: clothes, films, dogs, skiing, dinner parties, the feeling of being chosen by the most powerful man in Germany. She could frame the world literally through her camera lens in ways that protected her from the full reality outside. It was, as one historian described it, willful blindness. Her sister Ilse later recalled Eva becoming arrogant, tyrannical, and tactless as her proximity to power increased. When Ilse dared criticize Hitler's politics, Eva reportedly said, "If the Führer ever puts you in a concentration camp, I won't be the one to save you." This wasn't ignorance. This was choice. The Descent. June 1944. Everything begins to change. The Western Allies land at Normandy. The Eastern Front is collapsing. Germany's defeat becomes inevitable. Hitler leaves the Berghof for his military headquarters in East Prussia. He will never return to the mountain retreat. For Eva, this separation marks the beginning of the end. By autumn 1944, the facade is crumbling. Her cousin Gertrude, visiting the Berghof, observed, "Her happiness was so garish, it was obviously fake. I realized it was only a facade to cover up things that shouldn't be seen." Eva starts listening to radio news for the first time, tracking the Allied advance. Paris liberated. American troops reaching the German border. The Red Army pushing west. "She got more and more serious," Gertrude recalled. "The frantic joyfulness was gone. I think she was woken up by the news one day and then started planning her future path, through life or to death." On October 26, 1944, Eva dictates her last will and testament. She's only 32 years old, but her intentions are clear. She will die with Hitler. Phone calls from Hitler become her lifeline. Brief conversations, maybe 10 minutes, but everything depends on them. She always waited for his call and counted on him, Gertrude remembered. If he wouldn't have called, she would have been very sad. But the calls always came. The final act, March 1945. Eva makes her last trip to Berlin. This isn't spontaneous. She's made her decision. She spends weeks in Munich saying goodbye to family and friends, knowing she'll never see them again. In early April, she enters the Fuhrerbunker. Berlin is under constant Soviet bombardment. The city is dying. Hitler is trapped beneath the Reich Chancellery, issuing orders to armies that no longer exist. The conditions are grim. Stale air, constant explosions shaking the walls. Everyone knows the end is coming. On April 28th, just hours before Hitler will marry Eva, her brother-in-law Hermann Fegelein is executed for attempting to desert. The man who married Eva's sister less than a year earlier is court-martialed and shot on Hitler's orders. During the night of April 28th to 29th, 1945, Hitler and Eva marry in a brief civil ceremony. After 17 years together, Eva finally becomes Hitler's wife. Their marriage lasts less than 40 hours. On the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, Eva Hitler swallows a cyanide capsule. Adolf Hitler shoots himself moments later. Their bodies are carried to the garden, soaked with petrol, and burned. The meaning: Eva Braun's story offers no redemption and deserves no sympathy. She wasn't a victim. She had opportunities to leave. She chose to stay. She smiled for cameras while millions died. She filmed Christmas celebrations while genocide unfolded. She went on Italian holidays while soldiers died in battles her companions ordered. She benefited enormously from her position. Luxury while others starved. Freedom while others were imprisoned. Privilege purchased with the blood of millions. Whether through ignorance or indifference, she remained loyal to Hitler until the end. Her cousin Gertrude reflected years later. She married a sick old man, a murderer, a criminal, and her last consequence was going to her death with him. Some historians suggest Eva wanted to die as a married woman rather than a mistress, to give her family that small dignity after 17 years as Hitler's secret lover. If true, it's a staggering prioritization, worrying about social respectability while married to history's greatest mass murderer. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Eva Braun's story reveals something deeply uncomfortable about human nature: the capacity to focus on small personal concerns while surrounded by apocalyptic evil. She worried about her wardrobe while people were murdered in gas chambers. She organized dinner parties while cities burned. She filmed home movies while the world died. And she did it all, it seems, by simply choosing not to look too closely at what was happening beyond her privileged bubble. The lesson: we want to believe that the people around Hitler were monsters, that they were fundamentally different from us, that we would never make their choices. Eva Braun's story destroys that comfortable distance. She was ordinary, a shop assistant who met the wrong man at the wrong time, someone who valued status, privilege, and the feeling of being special, someone who chose comfort over conscience, someone who built a private dream around a man whose public deeds were a nightmare for millions. Her photographs and films created a historical record that raises profound questions. How do ordinary people become complicit in extraordinary evil? How do they maintain that complicity? What does it take to choose not to see? Eva Braun shows us one answer. You focus on your immediate world, your personal concerns, your small privileges. You frame reality through a lens that excludes what you don't want to acknowledge. You choose your comfort over truth. And perhaps, most disturbingly, you can do all this while still considering yourself a decent person, while celebrating Christmas, while loving dogs and enjoying films. That's the real horror of the Berghof. Not that monsters existed there, but that ordinary domesticity coexisted with mass murder. That people drank coffee and ate cake under the same roof where orders of genocide were discussed. That someone like Eva Braun could build 17 years of life around Adolf Hitler, and, when faced with the choice between leaving or dying with him, chose death. Epilogue. In her final hours in the bunker, Eva Braun became Eva Hitler. She lived in Hitler's shadow for 17 years, and in the end, she chose to die in it. Her story offers no heroes, no redemption, no comfort. It offers only a warning about the dangers of willful blindness, about the seduction of privilege, about how ordinary people enable extraordinary evil simply by choosing not to ask difficult questions. Eva Braun wasn't a Nazi leader. She didn't give orders that killed millions, but she stood beside the man who did. She benefited from his power. She maintained her privileged existence through years of genocide and war. And when the end came, she chose loyalty to him over anything else. She lived in the shadows and died in the shadows. Perhaps that's the only fitting end for someone who spent 17 years choosing not to look at the light. What do you think? Could you have made different choices in her position? Or does proximity to power and privilege corrupt more easily than we want to admit? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this exploration of complicity and moral responsibility gave you new perspective on how ordinary people enable evil, hit that like button and subscribe. We're examining the difficult questions history asks us, one story at a time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.